What happens when a rogue sprinkler becomes the ultimate weapon against a tyrannical HOA? Join me as I turn my lawn into a battlefield of laughter and rebellion. Before we begin today's deranged HOA story, tell me you haven't had your fill of irrational and power-grabbing HOA nonsense. Smash that like button to show you're on my side, and drop a comment if you've ever faced off against an overbearing homeowners association. Be sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell, because this saga's only getting crazier from here. As I stood in what felt like a dramatic Cold War standoff with Karen, a bemused expression flickered across her perfectly sculpted face. Her gaze, usually a weapon of intimidation, now battled with confusion, like a cat gazing at a cucumber. "Do I have to wear a gnome costume?" she finally murmured, her voice halting, as if any moment she'd be yanked back to her meticulously polished world of HOA rules and regulations. "Absolutely!" I shouted, the enthusiastic proclamation involuntarily bursting from my lips. The crowd erupted into a smattering of laughter, and I felt a rush of triumph wash over me. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn Karen into the quirkiest gnome ambassador this sleepy neighborhood had ever seen. In that glorious moment, I could almost hear the gears of Karen's mind grinding into a new alignment. People around us leaned in, eyes widening at the possibility. "Maybe we should get matching hats too," I continued, eyes glimmering mischievously. I could see Jenna stifling her giggles, and a few neighbors stifled coughs that were an audible dead giveaway of their stifled laughter. The idea of Karen sporting a goofy hat plopped onto her head solidified the fantasy. Could this truly be happening? As if the very notion of joy was contagious, slowly, the crowd began to join my side. "Why not?" called out Mr. Jennings, the retired police officer from 2 houses down. "If we're going full gnome revolution, we might as well go big or go home." The energy surged, a tidal wave of laughter and excitement that threatened to unearth the tight shackles of compliant suburbia. "Forget the gnome fashion show, how about a gnome battle royale?" Jenna yelled, practically bouncing like the over-caffeinated pinball she often resembled. I can see Karen as the commander, with a clipboard and glitter bombs. The uproarious laughter swept through the group, unraveling the last vestiges of Karen's practiced authority. It was a beautiful sight, her glossy blonde hair catching the sun, reflecting a newfound flicker of amusement that made me reconsider my opposition to the HOA's many rules. My heart raced at the thought. This could be the first gnome-fueled revolution to break away from the banalities of lawn care egos and roadside regulations. The neighbors congregating for this historic moment made me realize the absurdity of our situation. Maybe the reign of Karen, the grill mistress queen of lawn punishment, was indeed coming to an end. Yet just when I thought I could sway her deeply rooted HOA sensibilities, Mrs. Pringle, the elderly neighbor whose roses bloomed like defiance itself, chimed in with her soft southern drawl. "Well, if we're doing a theme party, I have just the thing. A gnome piñata, with candy. Who's on board?" What began as a simple, lighthearted upheaval morphed into something astonishingly lavish and ridiculous. I could hardly believe my ears, and watch in absolute awe as Karen teetered on the precipice of hilarity and disarray. "Should we also include karaoke?" I suggested, my eyes glimmering with mischief. I hear spectators love to see their HOA president attempt singing "I Will Survive." The laughter erupted anew, this time with the potency of confetti cannons, drowning out any semblance of authority that Karen once wielded. I could practically see her grasping for control, like a juggler trying to maintain that last ragged edge of decorum amidst chaos. And in the eye of this storm, Karen's loosened posture spoke volumes. She began to chuckle involuntarily, the sound strangling out the remnants of her usual stern demeanor. "All right, fine. But just for this one time," she finally conceded, the slightest echo of laughter escaping her lips like a runaway balloon. "But you better believe I'm keeping my gavel close." The reaction was instantaneous. It felt as if laughter itself exploded in technicolor around us. Neighborly bonds were forged in the fields of radiant chaos, giving way to a chorus of victorious cheers, and for the first time, perhaps ever, the HOA felt less like a tyrannical overlord and more like a whimsical family of gnome-loving comrades. As the meeting shifted purpose brilliantly into a bash celebrating all things ludicrous, I caught a glimpse of Jenna's proud, triumphant face bobbing in the jubilant crowd. Inspired, I decided I'd pull out all the stops. It would not just be the high-flying carnival of gnomes. We'd have contests, laughter, raucous competition, and even inflatable flamingos to throw everything into a wild, accessible hodgepodge of pure suburban inventiveness. I swooped in with ideas, tossing vibrant notions like confetti amidst the buoyant atmosphere. A gnome toss competition, or maybe a team relay with tiny lawnmowers, I shouted, reveling in the absurdity of it all. Who would have ever thought we'd be galvanizing the energy of our disillusioned neighborhood foes and cultivating them into one ridiculous event? Could it be that this was a turning point? What had once felt like a pantsuit fortified dungeon of oppressive regulations and suffocating restrictions was now morphing into an unexpectedly celebratory festival of absurdity. Even the thought of what awaited our gnome-clad selves sent jitters of joy dancing through my core. If I could flip the neighborhood on its head with humor and unity over righteous indignation, the future blooms limitless. But as I reveled in this jubilance, a question remained lingering like a spritz of lemonade on a hot day. How far could we take this delightfully surreal revolution, and would we finally unearth that underbelly of humanity beneath the stringent HOA? Or was this just the beginning of more ludicrous antics? Which avenue would this gnome revolution take next? As I stood there, basking in the afterglow of our unexpected triumph over the monotony of HOA tyranny, it occurred to me that we had unlocked a secret treasure trove of absurdity just beneath the surface of our sleepy neighborhood. The proposal for a gnome-themed extravaganza had lit up the faces of my fellow residents like the 4th of July. Giggling neighbors traded cleverly orchestrated ideas. They were no longer mere HOA subjects, but a ragtag family of eccentric revolutionaries. I felt the adrenaline surge through my veins, transforming my nervous fidgeting into fluid motion as I outlined our plans on the nearest flip chart, a glorified calendar of chaos waiting to be realized. First up, the Gnome Fashion Show, I declared, bowing slightly, relishing the applause I was met with, despite the ridiculousness of it all. Oh, but the best was yet to come. I glanced over to my cohort of conspirators, Jenna in her oversized hoodie spouting suggestions like a sprinkler gushing water, her messy bun bobbing with each enthusiastic point. "Don't forget the gnome karaoke booth," she exclaimed, playfully pantomiming a microphone escape. I can already picture Karen belting out "Gnome Sweet Gnome." The laughter that erupted from the gathering felt like rolling waves of joy washing over a parched shore. Simultaneously, I wondered if this shift towards lightheartedness was anything but a facade, like a thin layer of whipped cream atop a disaster cake. How could we maintain this momentum without devolving back into the playground of petty grievances that the HOA usually thrived on? The crescendo of excitement had taken a wild turn, and instead of backing down, Karen had become rather animated herself. She began tossing in her own suggestions, emptying her typically polished aesthetic of its stale rigidity. "How about we add a Gnome Olympics?" she proposed, her tone almost playful. "We could have gnome-themed obstacle courses involving lawnmowers and feather boas." The moment hung in the air, thick with everyone's disbelief. The same woman I'd once seen meticulously citing lawn decorum violations was now suggesting events fit for a bright carnival stalling traffic. Laughter rippled throughout the gathering. If it wasn't for her pastel ensemble, it would have been hard to recognize her as the same tyrant we both feared and maneuvered against. Could it be that, through this shared absurdity, even Karen was beginning to crack? I took a moment to revel in the imagery of her resplendent in lawnmower racing attire while trying to dodge inflatable flamingos, and it was so ludicrous that if I didn't laugh, I would risk bursting from holding it in. "Great idea, Karen," I yelled, my enthusiasm palpable. I, your humble citizen, was now willingly inviting her into our misfit troupe. "Let's have a Gnome Olympics. I'll even design the medals, tin foil wrapped around paper plates." As I shouted that last part, I could hardly control my giggles, knowing full well the ridiculousness of such an award ceremony. The crowd began to chant in delight, their playful approval granting us a strange sense of legitimacy. But the gnome-themed extravaganza wasn't merely about whimsical chaos. Beneath the layers of silliness and glittery piñata shenanigans, there was a message. We were essentially scoffing at the notion of entitlement that the HOA had become synonymous with, our collective laughter striking at the absurdity of rules that restricted imagination and neighborly connection. As Karen was slowly realizing, we were not just gnome enthusiasts. We were a coalition of people realizing the value of community over control, camaraderie over coldness. This was our chance to breathe life into the very idea of what neighbors could be, co-conspirators against dull rules and oppressive silence. As the initial enthusiasm transformed into a full-blown plan, neighbors banded together, their expressions brimming with anticipation. We divided our roles and responsibilities, assigning lives beneath the glittering spectacle set to unfold. I worked with Jenna to create hilariously outrageous advertising banners. We decided, "No Num Left Behind" would be our slogan. Meanwhile, Mr. Jennings, fueled by nostalgia for his 30 years on the job as a police officer, volunteered as our esteemed judge, announcing he would also offer a trophy for the best gnome costume. Oh, the irony. The neighborhood's unofficial law enforcer was engaging us in an intricate dance of joy. I could hardly contain my elation as I realized our movement was spiraling into something truly contagious. Yet there lingered the question I could not quite shake. Would this wild gnome-inspired uprising stick? Would we stay united past the laughable boundaries we had created? Or would we inevitably drift back into the banal, oppressive culture that had hammered us into compliance? With lines drawn in the sand, a haunting thought crept in. Could we maintain this momentum beyond the bounds of our carnival? My gaze drifted across the vibrant group, now buzzing with excitement, considering the unique tapestry of personalities intertwined in this gnome brawl. What if instead of folding back into the lovably lopsided carrot of compliance, we stepped off the beaten path and truly transformed our own little corner of suburbia? A small voice inside urged me to forge onward. I could just imagine it, a modified world where our community thrived on every quirk, giggle, and gnome. Is that too whimsical to aspire to, or just the beginning of a lovely revolution? I stared incredulously at Karen's self-important figure, hands on hips and sporting her usual expression that seemed to scream, "I'm important, and you are most definitely not." She had arrived, much like a thunderstorm on a clear day, to inform me that my lawnmower intruded on the HOA's sacred quiet landscaping hours. These unwritten rules, etched upon her meticulously manicured lawn, and likely forged in the heat of her unimaginable entitlement, dictated when and how I could engage with my lawn. Who decided that 2 p.m. on a perfect Saturday was a crime scene for the sheer joy of mowing? The sun felt like a spotlight on my absurdity, and the laughter brewing in my gut bubbled dangerously close to the surface. Surely I must have misheard her. What was next? Banning laughter near the postal box? As I imagined the HOA enforcing a decree to silence the neighborhood's bird chatter, my frustration began to churn. Surely, I thought, if she's going to overshadow my manly bond with my trusty mower, I need to retaliate with the sharpest weapon in my arsenal: wit, ingenuity, and a sprinkling of mischief. If my mower was too loud for her delicate sensibilities, then what could I do to make a point? A glorious idea sparked. I would install a talking sprinkler. Oh, not just any automated watering system, but one that blared out Karen's name at maximum volume every time it engaged. "Hey Karen," it would shout, "we've got thirsty grass over here." I could already see the flabbergasted look on her perfectly painted face as the neighborhood turned into a comedic battleground of auditory absurdity. That was it. I was going to inject some hilarity into this HOA war, and Jenna was on board with the idea right away, her laughter like the perfect seasoning for my wild scheme. We spent an entire evening planning the details, choosing the most obnoxious voice modulation options for my sprinkler that would transform it into a veritable DJ, complete with synthesized FX and exaggerated enunciations, as if announcing a prize-winning pony. This lawn sprinkler would not only water my grass, it would deliver Karen's name as if it were the headline of the worst local newspaper. "Karen Wilkins, president of the HOA, here to disrupt the casual vibes." I chuckled to myself, knowing this would be the most entertaining show the neighborhood had ever seen. With my plan underway, the installation went surprisingly smooth, like a glimmering work of art unfolding before my eyes. The sun had dipped below the buildings, leaving me with soft twilight as I finally switched on the sprinkler. Like an actor finally taking the stage, it began to squawk. "Karen, you're missing out on the splendid hydration of these leaves." The sound echoed across the lawns, making it impossible for even the quietest neighbor not to notice. I swear I could feel Karen's perfectly coiffed hair standing on end from half a block away. This was it. It was reckoning time, or maybe more appropriately, a comedy hour. I was just about to kick back and enjoy the show when I suddenly spied Karen's unmistakable silhouette, fuming as she marched over, hands once again planted firmly on her hip. The spectacle of her indignation was almost too much to bear. Here was this woman, mouth agape in furious disbelief, as she walked towards me with the slow, deliberate gait shared by wild predators who had smelled blood. "Max," she shouted, her tone as rigid as her pastel attire, "you can't seriously think this immature prank will stand. I demand you stop this right now." But there was no stopping the inexorable hilarity of the moment. Oh, how I relished the taste of rebellion, mixed with the honeyed delight of humor. Nope, I was not coming down from this cloud of freedom lightly. I was going to party on the precipice of absurdity. "I think you'll find, dear Karen, I said, barely containing my laughter. That lawn care, like life, is about balance. Today I'm just engaging my lovely lawn in a dialogue. Grass, meet Karen. My assurance wobbled a bit, but how could I stand here without a smirk? I was completely electrified, the joy electrifying my fingertips as I waved her off playfully, mimicking someone who would dismiss a pesky mosquito. I glanced over to Jenna, and she was doubled over in laughter, clutching her sides, and I felt that glorious swelling of camaraderie. We were living our best lives in the quiet chaos of civil disobedience against the unnatural authority of the HOA. Would my audacity become my new neighborhood legacy, or would I soon be embroiled in a civil tussle for greater landscaping liberty? As Karen stood there fuming, her overblown sense of entitlement hanging heavy in the air like the thick humidity before a summer storm, I felt alive, ready for whatever wacky escalation awaited us next. If laughter is indeed the best medicine, then maybe what this neighborhood needed was a dose of downright silliness. Would Karen even realize it? Or was her obliviousness so solidly unshakable that it was actually a questionable superpower? I felt a wave of triumph wash over me. Today felt like a triumph against the ridiculousness of strictures that attempted to snuff out individuality. Was she truly going to fight against joy? I chuckled to myself, thrilled as my sprinkler yelled, "Karen!" Even the grass loves a good laugh. What could she possibly say about that? The expression on Karen's face was a masterpiece of incredulity, shadowed only by the layers of frustration building up within her pristine pastel blouse. As the sprinkler shouted her name like some robotic cheerleader, she resembled a rare bird caught in a downpour, utterly bewildered and furious, feathers ruffled in disbelief. "Max, this is crossing a line," she screeched, pointing an accusatory finger that seemed to wilt in its own self-righteousness. My favorite part of the performance, though, was how she paused mid-sentence, as if trying to will herself into a state of undeniable indignation. Perhaps, in her mind, the ultimate superpower of suburban supremacy. Oh, how I longed for a clipboard to take notes. Could I get a gold star for the best HOA counterattack ever? Watching her simmer and writhe, I felt like a kid in a candy store, high on the sugar rush of rebellious energy. While she continued to flounder in her futile battle, Jenna was on the sidelines like a hyperactive sports commentator. You know, if she were any more uptight, she'd explode. Jenna chortled, nearly tripping over her own feet to grab her phone and capture this moment of grand hilarity. There we were, the side characters in the absurd sitcom that was my life. "Ms. Wilkins, don't you think your sacred quiet landscaping hours could use a witty refresh?" I shouted, relishing my role as the protagonist challenging the tyrant. If she thought that time had come for me to cower, she was about as correct as a GPS trying to lead you off a cliff. Then it hit me. Who was I to underestimate the power of laughter, especially in the face of someone as stubborn as Karen? A grin formed wider across my face, and I leaned into the moment. All at once, my heart surged with boldness. "Karen, my dear," I called out, my voice dripping with melodrama. What could possibly be more obnoxious than joyfully hydrating my lawn while you strut around reminding everyone of your self-assigned lawn overlord status? I could almost see the steam rising from her perfectly coiffed hair, and I momentarily wondered if it was possible to set off a small explosion from the sheer volume of her indignation. Yet part of me loved this struggle, this dance of wills, two absurdities colliding like the cogs of an underwhelming machine trying its best to function. Just then, the cape of divine intervention fluttered over us. None other than the lively Miss Thompson from down the street, a distance runner whose contagious laugh could outshine the sun. She jogged past, her ponytail bouncing as she giggled and yelled over the commotion. "What's this about shouting sprinklers?" I thought my ears were deceiving me, but clearly it was mere scandal-laced reality. The sight of her joining the fray sent my spirits soaring. It turned out I had activated an entire faction of neighborhood merrymakers. With that, the tension loosened as, one by one, heads peeked out from behind curtains, curiosity melting into amusement. Was this the rise of the revolutionary lawn care movement? Could we really overthrow the oppressive regime with a wave of humor? Fueled by this unexpected support, I couldn't help but raise my voice even higher, much like a sports announcer promoting a surprise victory. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the showdown of the century, Max versus Karen." Riveting entertainment brought to you by the absurdity of forbidden laughter in HOA politics. As the neighborhood spectators began to gather, their expressions morphed from dismay into a shared bubble of joy. Karen's expression only deepened, turning from crimson to a shade resembling maraschino cherries, the flickering tendrils of frustration painfully evident. It was like watching a toddler thrown into a whimsical fantasy world, utterly unprepared to navigate the chaos. But just as I was savoring the sweet taste of triumph, Karen snapped back into action like a cat caught napping too long. "This isn't over, Max! You think this childish prank will be tolerated?" Her tone was drenched in that strange mixture of righteous anger and utter confusion, a sight to behold, honestly. I was having the time of my life watching this drama unfold, and Jenna couldn't have agreed more. Both of us rolled our eyes, and I swayed back theatrically, saying, "Karen, oh wonderful guardian of the HOA, your overreactions bring me tears of joy as I savor this delicious irony, serving up righteous hilarity for everyone to enjoy." The onlookers couldn't contain themselves, laughter pouring forth like the water my sprinkler so happily dispensed. Realizing the crowd was now clearly on my side, I decided it was time to up the ante, unleashing the full fury of my creativity on Karen on what would surely go down as the great HOA watershed moment. With mock gravitas, I raised my hands like a conductor orchestrating the greatest symphony of chaos, preparing everyone for the encore performance. And now, dear neighbors, let's tip our hats to Karen, the commander in charge of the Lawn of Silence, who thinks my lawn should be more like a solitary confinement state where no laughter or joy is allowed. The energy of the crowd surged, and I reveled in their claps and cheers. This was a community bonding over the absurdity of strict regulations. Could this moment of rebellion unite us further? As Karen continued to stand there, simmering in disbelief, I found myself grinning ear to ear, fully aware that this was only the beginning. If a loud sprinkler could rattle the very essence of pristine suburban existence, what other surprises lay in the wild frontier of neighborhood shenanigans? The thought energized me. Would Karen finally break from her iron-gripped stranglehold of neighborhood decorum, or would she stand resolute against my playful challenge? Just then, her expression shifted, and I couldn't help but wonder. Was there a glimmer of amusement reflected in those steely eyes? Perhaps I was part of a bold new era, where laughter reigned supreme over the whims of HOA tyranny. The sprinklers would shout, the onlookers would chuckle, and who knows, maybe just maybe, a breakthrough could emerge from this whirlpool of ridiculousness. As the chaos swirled like autumn leaves caught in a whimsical breeze, I indulged in the sheer absurdity of it all. The crowd, which had transformed from reluctant onlookers peeking from their curtains to full-blown cheering fans, fed my defiance like a bonfire, invigorated by the stoked embers of enthusiasm. Wasn't this the precise element I had long yearned for? I stood tall and resolute against the towering figure of Karen Wilkins, my nefarious HOA nemesis. The onlookers' cackles of delight danced around us, turning my once mundane front yard into a vibrant ground zero for neighborhood rebellion. There was something electric in the air, the heady aroma of victory over the drudgery that has long plagued our suburban lives. Yet under this veil of triumphant merriment, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity towards Karen's metamorphosis. In that moment, instead of the disapproving hawk I had come to expect, who was glaring with all the ferocity of a lion scolded for stealing a glance at a gazelle, her furious facade began to crack. Could the pressure of such spirited ridicule chip away at her otherwise indomitable spirit? My curiosity tugged at me like a kid yanking on a parent's sleeve for a sweet treat. Just as those tantalizing thoughts flitted in and around my mind, I noticed something peculiar in her posture. It shifted from stern to almost bemusement. Was it possible she was momentarily entertained by the sheer ridiculousness of her own position? Perhaps I had managed to poke a hole in the singular bubble of her elaborate world of self-righteous authority. "Max!" she squawked, the indignation flinging itself from her lips like a poorly aimed spitball. "You may think this is all fun and games, but I assure you, oh, how this diatribe of desperation was punctuated by the muted clang of another one of my sprinklers, shoving its gleeful voice into the grand fray. It bellowed, 'Karen, you need to chill,' and I roared with laughter as it caught her mid-sentence, sending her words slumping back down into silence. The absurdity of this scenario was so magnificent, like a full-scale theatrical production with poorly constructed props and an audience doubting the plot. Amidst my fits of healing laughter, Jenna nudged me, a twinkle of delight sparking in her gaze. "Can you believe this? Maybe we should offer her a reality TV show contract." Keeping up with Karen, the Lawn Wars. In the throes of culinary rebellion nestled in my yard, it suddenly struck me just how much humor could act as a great equalizer. Here we were, a collection of lawn-loving renegades, breaking the chains of unyielding decorum together, all united against the whims of one pastel-bedecked tyrant. Miss Thompson, cheerleader extraordinaire of neighborhood hilarity, suddenly raised her arms, summoning the crowd. Let's give our beloved sprinkler system a round of applause. They're just doing their job. The eruption of claps shook the ground while Karen continued to twitch awkwardly, desperately clutching her martini glass as if it were the last life preserver aboard the sinking ship of her own resistance. Had I inadvertently become the monarch of this fantastical HOA circus? Who knew if I would emerge as the rightful ruler of a neighborhood renaissance born from the watered roots of silly sprinklers? Okay, Max, Jenna interjected, flicking strands of hair from her face while the crowd roared in hapless glee. But what's your next move? You can't exactly let this be the endgame. My mind raced up the ladder of inventive possibilities, wildly envisioning new ways to poke fun at my overbearing antagonist. Would I cover her prized hydrangeas with rubber ducks next? Perhaps turn her pristine white fence into a giant canvas, commissioned to declare my lawn glory for all to see? To infuse a bouquet of bizarre creativity into every unsuspecting flower bed could be the key to fireworks in this horticultural face-off. The truth was, Molly's castle might just need a few more humorous siege weapons. But amidst this whirlwind of laughter and audacity, I began to notice Karen's evolving expression. The initially furious blush began to give way to something unexpected, a flicker of intrigue, maybe even respect for the resilience I'd unearthed from my own indignation. As her lips twitched in a direction unbeknownst to her own steely determination, it was as if Karen was caught in a tug-of-war between her past self and this newfound perspective. Perhaps the bliss of laughter wasn't only for me but available for her too. Could I entice her to let go of her tightly wound rein and share in this delightful absurdity? Would she ever smile again, despite the lurking imperatives of her ironclad rule? Just when I was caught in these spirals of thought, I shouted, "Hey Karen, care for a quick garden gnome party? I hear it brings out the best giggles." A moment of reaction passed, a beat that felt like it stretched longer than a season finale cliffhanger, leaving the neighborhood at a delicious precipice of anticipation. The air crackled like static from a winner's reel. Would the full weight of laughter collapse the iron facade, leading to a new beginning? Or would Karen spiral back into her usual need for stringent decorum, forcing us back into conformity? My senses danced, my heart raced, and with all the fervor of a gladiator in the arena, I waited on the edge of this unfolding saga, hoping against hope that perhaps, just perhaps, a new lawn of laughter and connection might just sprout from this delightful chaos. The crowd fell silent, their eager faces plastered with anticipation, as if I had just announced a colossal surprise at a birthday bash. My voice echoed across the well-manicured lawns, reverberating within us all, while Karen's expression flitted between outrage and confusion, reminiscent of a cat witnessing a dog orchestrating a symphony. "A garden gnome party, Karen," I exclaimed, my enthusiasm spilling over like a poorly poured glass of lemonade. "Think about it, plastic gnomes and conga lines, dancing in the sunshine and you in charge of the sparkling grape juice. It could be a splendid distraction from your lawn regulations." Her eyes narrowed in disbelief. The irony of the situation was too delicious, too completely absurd for a normal day in suburbia. This was my pièce de résistance, my master stroke in the ongoing HOA saga. Would she succumb to the charm of hilarity, or would she cling desperately to the edges of her pastel world, terrified of the smiles and mirth that lurked beyond its borders? Jenna leaned toward me, her face adorned with a smirk so wide it could practically lift my spirits off the ground. "Max, if you keep this up, you might end up accidentally throwing her a retirement party from the role as HOA president." Her laughter chimed sweetly amongst the stillness while I cast a sidelong glance at the gathering. It was almost surreal. Here stood a faction of homeowners, once bond-worthy in their fear of Karen's gavel, now transformed into a collective force of cheeky defiance, fueled by the outlandish gauntlet I had dared to throw. Miss Thompson bounced on her toes, reminding the spectators, "Who wouldn't want free refreshments, gnomes, and a whole boatload of fun? Let's do this." As tentative laughter began to ripple through the crowd, I could decide if I was riding a wave of gut-busting amusement or merely har-harring into the belly of the HOA behemoth. Amid the amplified energy, Karen's facade cracked even further. As she stood rigid with a firm grip on her martini glass, I could see an internal war raging within her. Would she come to embrace the gnome revolution, or would she unleash a tirade that would barge right through our playful barricade? Teetering on the edge of abandoning her steely resolve, I envisioned her as an actor in a Shakespearean comedy, unaccustomed to the chaos that was being thrust upon her. "Oh, please, Karen, don't wear that stern face the entire evening," I quipped. as her features flickered in protest. "It's just a lawn party. A chance to bond with your neighbors and, capture some real happiness for a change," laughter erupted, and in that moment, possibility sparked with a fierce urgency. A clash of resignation and mischief within the all-too-perfect garden version of a Shakespearean squabble. But as the fantastic possibility of uniting under a frivolous theme began to pull at Karen's expressions, her finely coiffed hair flicked with the breeze like a flags of subjugation fighting for freedom. I could feel the fervor rise among my fellow lawn warriors, compelling more jubilance. Perhaps our prized HOA president should consider an open mic night during the garden gnome shindig, spat Jenna with mischievous enthusiasm. We could really hear her inner thoughts about suburban discipline. Wouldn't that be a treat? The applause shot through the air, granting Jenna the thunderous support of cherub-faced neighbors, all while Karen's mouth opened slightly. A vulnerable crack, where mirth stopped short of fully invading her tightly curated world. Riding high on this comedy-fueled momentum, I determined it was now or never. I would squeeze every last drop from this delightful chaos. "Or how about a gnome fashion show?" I hollered, feeling like the ringleader of a garden ridiculousness carnival. "Best dressed gnome wins a prize. Who wouldn't want a sparkling tiara for their beloved lawn decorations?" The ebullient responses cascaded, a tsunami of enthusiasm that revealed Karen's flushed cheeks straddling the spectrum between amusement and outright irritation. Suddenly, I feared my audacious endeavor might summon a deluge that would reinstate every purchase of tiny wrought iron fences and pastel lawn ornaments she had ever deemed sacred. Yet the crowd surged with laughter, leaving no doubt that the gnome party could indeed shrink the borders of Karen's formidable reign. As I spun this web of daring absurdity, Karen's posturing began to soften, evident in the way her sleeve fell from its rigid formality, transforming her once indomitable presence into something more relatable, if only for a fleeting moment. What if I was unwittingly wheeling tenacious change into her and exposing her to the joy she had ostracized through her reign of terror? "You're welcome to join us, Karen, but you need to sink your heels into that gnome-tastic spirit. This gnome shindig isn't just for us, it's for you too." My heart raced, charged with a blissful, almost mischievous energy. Did I dare hope that I could rip her from her flawless pastel chrysalis and unleash laughter onto darkened bureaucratic corners? If gnomes would lead the charge, then we would all be in for a wild ride. She looked up then, the fight in her subsiding like the tide pulling back from the shore. The moment was electrifying, a juncture of opposites where laughter could become our common language and human connection could bridge the chasm we thought could never be traversed. Just as I strained to decode the tender intrigue behind her steely eyes, the crowd hushed once more, awaiting that pivotal response. Would she reclaim her grumpy crown and reignite her HOA rule, or would she give in to the momentary relief of this fantastical idea that we so whimsically conjured? My thoughts raced. Maybe, just maybe, this was the end of a long reign of resistance, and the gnome-filled field of laughter would mark our shared beginning. What could be more sublime than discovering humor can bridge divides? Wouldn't the world seem downright magical if even Karen found it in her to break formality, and not only laugh, but join in to celebrate our splendid suburban chaos? Thanks for sticking around with me through the chaos to the end. Want more high-stakes HOA drama? Check out our recent HOA clash with the video on the right. Or let YouTube pick your next wild ride with the video on the left. Whichever way you go, buckle up. There's plenty more HOA insanity on the way. Tune in again for more HOA chaos.